Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Eerie News, and today we've got we're going into that area that I just absolutely love, which is true crime. But I've got a couple of other stories. One, as a matter of fact, is a follow-up to a prior story. But let's get off to it. All right. And this first story is out of Eerie News. It's an article, and it's titled "After 40 Years, Another Victim of Florida Serial Killer Billy Mansfield Identified." This is a double one for me. It's a true crime, and it's based here out of Florida. And this is a really interesting case. That's in my opinion. On May 16th, 1980, Teresa Fillingham, 16, was reported missing to the Tampa Police Department. On April 3rd, 1981, several human remains were recovered from the property of Billy Mansfield. On July 20th, 2022, with the help of DNA evidence, one of the skeletons was confirmed as belonging to Teresa. William Billy Mansfield Jr. was the eldest of five children, born to a father who was a convicted child molester. He joined the Army as a teenager. After altering his birth certificate while serving, he became addicted to alcohol and drugs. In 1975, he lived in Michigan and married Phyllis Spielmaker. His family was originally from Grand Rapids. His wife described Mansfield as a closeted bisexual who often brought men home that he picked up at gay bars and engaged in sex in front of her. He once discussed a murder with her. She said he was easygoing. However, when drunk, he would become violent. By the time they divorced in 1979, he had returned to his family home in Florida. In 1975, Elaine Ziegler, 15, an Ohio native, was vacationing with her family in a campground near Brooksville, Florida. She was last seen walking to the showers. Initially, it was thought she was a runaway. Several witnesses described seeing her talking to a younger man near the shower area and getting into his light blue 1966 Ford Fairlane with Florida plates. The family went to bed not realizing until the next morning she had not returned. All her belongings were left behind. The only thing missing was her hairdryer, which she had taken to the showers. The search led nowhere, and Elaine appeared to have dropped off the face of the earth. 2 years later, Billy Mansfield pled guilty to a sexual misconduct charge against a babysitter. He received a sentence of 6 months and 36 months probation. Shortly after serving his prison term, he raped two teenagers, aged 15 and 16, at knife point in a rural area of Grand Rapids, Michigan. He committed the crime on the second anniversary of Ziegler's disappearance. He was sent back to jail for violating his probation. His cellmate during this jail stint was Albert Lee III, 27, who told him he murdered Linda Vanderveen, age 11, a school crossing guard who was abducted from her post in February 1979. Lee was arrested 6 weeks after Vanderveen's body was found in a snowbank. She'd been strangled with her uniform tie. Mansfield used this information to testify against Lee in exchange for a lesser sentence. He served only 1 year. Later that year, Albert Lee was convicted, but it was overturned because witnesses were hypnotized. 12 years later, a second trial ended with a conviction of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life without parole. In a 2009 prison interview, Lee denied killing Vanderveen, telling the reporter that police planted evidence in his car. By then, Linda's parents and her brother were dead. In 2022, he is still serving his sentence. Now back to Billy Mansfield. Once Mansfield was released, he returned to Florida, and in June 1980, Mansfield forced Pamela Sherrill, 18, into his van, then drove to a trailer where he lived. He proceeded to beat her. She reported the attack to police, but he had fled when they went to the location. 5 months later, he was arrested in Santa Cruz, California, but he posted bail and was a free man once more. In November 1981, the body of Renee Sailing, 29, a mother of three, was found off a road in Watsonville, California. She was partially nude with her blouse torn and pants lowered to her ankles. She was raped and strangled to death, but her body was also riddled with bullets. The police said she was killed elsewhere and dumped where passing motorists found the body, which was in a drainage ditch leading between the bar and the KOA campground where the Mansfield brothers were renting a trailer. Later was determined she met Billy Mansfield at the Wooden Nickel 2 bar, and they left together in his green Oldsmobile Tornado. Mansfield was reportedly working at a mushroom farm in Santa Cruz. Witnesses testified she was drunk when she arrived at the bar around 10 p.m. looking for her husband, Raymond. He saw her first and hid in the bathroom to avoid a confrontation. Within minutes of arriving, the manager threw her out because she was so intoxicated. Sometime after this, she hooked up with Mansfield. Less than a week later, Billy and his brother Gary, 23, were arrested in Nevada for questioning in Saling's murder. Despite lying about their identity, they matched the description of the Mansfield brothers, and they were arrested. Both were arraigned on murder charges. The media called them the Bag Brothers, since they wore paper bags over their heads to hide their appearance. They pled not guilty to the charges. November of 1980 was not a good month for the Mansfield boys. William Mansfield Sr., an air conditioning repairman, was sentenced to 30 years in prison for sex crimes involving young girls. He was originally charged with 40 sex offenses, but the charges were dropped in a plea bargain with prosecutors, and he was convicted of only 4 sex-related crimes. He pled no contest to 3 counts of lewd and lascivious assault on a child under 14 and 1 count of soliciting a minor for prostitution. Another one of his sons, Robbie Mansfield, 18, was arrested in Brooksville on a charge of burglary of a dwelling and grand theft of a rifle. William Mansfield Sr. was released in 2005 based on his good behavior after serving a third of his sentence. That year, William Mansfield's crimes, the Tampa Bay Times reported that William Mansfield's crimes included sex acts with dozens of children, including one girl who was just 9 months old when the abuse began. In March 1981, an anonymous tip led the Hernando County Sheriff's Department to secure a warrant to excavate a 6-acre property belonging to the Mansfield family in Spring Hill, Florida. Virginia Mansfield, mother of Billy, Robbie, and Gary, still lived in a trailer house along with her stepmother and 3 other sons. The family had moved to the property from Michigan in 1970. Digging among the junk that littered the grounds 10 feet from the trailer, the first discovery was made. They found a skull and a hip bone covered by a blanket in a shallow grave. The bones appeared to belong to a child between the age of 9 and 12. The skeleton was lying on its side in a fetal position. Then other bones were found. An examination by a pathologist concluded they belonged to a female under 20 years of age. Then a second set of remains were tentatively identified as those of Elaine Ziegler, missing since 1975. The excavation continued, turning up cow and chicken bones. A week later, under a fireplace, a small sack of bones was found. These were later determined to belong to an animal. 2 more skeletons belonging to young women were unearthed. Soon identified were the remains of Sandra Jean Graham, 21, a divorcee who had disappeared from the parking lot of Pam's Liquor Lounge in Tampa the year before. She was seen in the company of a man described as a biker. A dental comparison confirmed who she was. It was determined she had been strangled with an electrical wire. The skulls of the other 2 Jane Does were sent for reconstruction, but no matches were made. October of 1981, Billy Mansfield escaped to the aid of another prisoner. Within 12 hours, they were arrested. When Mansfield's trial began in July of 1981, the prosecutor read from a letter he had sent to his mother. It read, "There are certain circumstances from which God seems to absent himself, concrete circumstances of violent action and response from which there is no retreat and in which man is left alone and in darkness to make his own life or death decisions." While being held in California, he was indicted for the murder of one of the 4 victims found on his property. He was also charged with attempted sexual battery of Pamela Sherrill. During his 1982 trial, his brother Gary and a woman known as Cindy testified against him. For his cooperation, conspiracy charges against Gary Mansfield were dropped. The reason for this was they believed that when Billy Mansfield killed Renee Saling, his brother didn't know what he'd done. He just told his brother, "Let's leave, we gotta leave." And he left. And that's why he was facing a conspiracy charge, and well, he pled himself out of that one. In 1982, during Mansfield's trial for the Florida murders, Peggy Oates Knight, 22, described the night when Elaine Ziegler disappeared. She said that Elaine believed Mansfield would help her run away from home. Knight lived near the KOA campsite near the Mansfield property. The Santa Cruz Sentinel reported she had become friends with Elaine, who she described as a loner, very quiet. She always walked around like she had problems. The evening before she disappeared, she told Knight she wanted to run away because her stepfather had made sexual advances toward her. She testified that Elaine said the man had sexual relations with her. She didn't want to tell her mother because she had just married her stepfather. She told Knight she'd met someone named Billy who was going to take her south to Miami and take care of her. Soon after, Mansfield showed up at the recreation room. He was filthy. Knight said she warned Ziegler not to leave with him, but she went anyway. She said that Mansfield's eyes were dark, piercing, and extremely dilated. His eyes looked so black, like they looked right through you. It was frightening, very scary, she said. Fast forward to October of 2020. When police arrived at Gary Mansfield's home at 3442 Roundup Lane, situated behind his parents' house, a search warrant yielded equipment for a meth lab and illegal drugs. The 62-year-old was subsequently arrested on several drug possessions and distribution charges. They said they located items on a nearby property they were deemed to be suspicious. Remember, this is the Gary that 20 years before pled out of conspiracy charges and where his brother, was locked up. Now, this led, in other words, my point being, this guy obviously did not learn his lesson at all. This led to a search of the Mansfield property on Centerwood Avenue in the Weeki Wachee Acres neighborhood where remains were unearthed in 1981. It's known as the House of Horrors by neighbors. Ironically, the Mansfield property is less than 500 feet from a church called Iglesia de Dios Corona, or Church of God's Crown. On July 20th, 2022, one of the Jane Does unearthed in 1981 was given a name. She is Teresa Caroline Fillingham. She disappeared a week from her 17th birthday. Her sister reported her missing on May 16th, 1980. Her remains were sent to different labs through the years, but not until 2020 were they able to develop a DNA profile. In 2022, a new technique was used on the sample, and with the information developed, it was compared to her sister, which confirmed her identity. Her sister, Margaret Johns, who lives in Cape Coral, Florida, had been made aware the year before that they tentatively had found her sister's remains, but confirmation was made now. She felt that many of her family members were cheated of disclosure since many of them had passed away. Billy Mansfield is up for parole this year. John says if she has to fly out there and testify herself to keep him from getting out, then that's what she'll do. Court documents said all the women found in 1981 on the Mansfield property were sexually assaulted by both Billy Mansfield, his younger brother Gary, and their father, William Mansfield Sr. It was Mansfield Jr. who would then kill them and sometimes dismember them. The fourth set of remains is still a Jane Doe, I'm sorry. Now, remember, this all happened in 1981, late 70s, so even though Gary and his dad, which I think is like 80, are still alive, and they basically found that they sexually assaulted these women, besides the statute of limitations on rape it's gone. The only thing that has no statute of limitation is murder. And Billy Mansfield is serving the sentence for that, which, by the way, I don't know how he's coming up for parole, but I don't know. That's California for you. But anyway, that's a great story because, again, it shows that DNA is really helping to solve a lot of these crimes, because they had found Elaine Ziegler's remains since 1981. Okay? But they couldn't confirm it. And it's a shame because, like her sister said, a lot of the family has passed away. This is like a tongue-in-cheek. I think this is very funny. This is a mass meltdown as iconic ice cream treat Choco Taco is discontinued. There has been a mass meltdown as confectionery company Klondike has made the decision to discontinue the famous Choco Taco ice cream treat. Adorers of the sugary snack, an ice cream encased in a sugar taco and coated in chocolate and peanuts, have taken to Twitter to express their outrage, and news shows across America have even orchestrated mourning ceremonies to cope with the loss of the beloved ice cream treat. Stephen Foster tweeted "RIP" or "RIP" to a real one to express his unhappiness with Klondike's decision. Klondike tweeted to confirm the discontinuation of the Choco Taco and suggested and said that consumers try Klondike's other delicious frozen treats such as Klondike cones, shakes, sandwiches, and of course our signature bar available nationwide. The company described the decision to cancel the consumer's favorite as particularly painful. They have claimed to be working hard to find a way to bring Choco Taco back to ice cream trucks in the coming years. The decision is said to be down to the shift in demand over the past 2 years. Others have tweeted the company asking them to undo their decision. Some people have bought Choco Tacos so that they can slowly wean themselves off the sugary childhood favorite. Why would they? I don't get it. Why? I mean, this. I know I've eaten Choco Taco. I've not for a while, but why would you stop making them? I don't know. I don't get it. Maybe it's just it's advertising ploy, you know. This is a follow up. A few weeks ago, I had talked about a story. I think it's great, out of the feral chickens that are taking over Hawaii. And the last time the chickens were winning, And I'm going to follow up. They're still winning. This is out of Courthouse News Service, and it's titled Fowl Fowl. Hawaii locals overwhelmed by wild chickens. Believe it or not, that translates into the chickens are winning. All right. Honolulu, although many destinations have their share of distinctive animals, Hawaii boasts a particularly unique range of creatures that call the islands home. For all its incredible biodiversity, however, Hawaii has instead been dominated not by the gentle Hawaiian sea turtles or the adorable Hawaiian monk seals it is known for, but by a growing population of chickens. Jokingly referred to as the real state bird over the nene goose, the wildfowl have grown to record numbers on each of the Hawaiian islands. Kauai especially hosts massive colonies of these feral chickens, but even on the more metropolitan island of Oahu, the chickens are everywhere. As a relatively isolated island chain, there are few species that are endemic to Hawaii. The chicken is not one of those species. Their proliferation has become the source of some debate. Locals throw around the theory that Hurricane Iniki in 1992 may be to blame for destroying coops and fences containing the farm animals. Some speculate the chickens have a longer lineage in Hawaii. A 2015 study traced the genome of the feral chickens of Kauai and found traces of DNA belonging to the culturally significant red jungle fowl brought by ancient Polynesians when they first settled in Hawaii. Still, others believe the chicken problem is really a people problem, pointing to the popularity of cockfighting on the islands that encourages the population growth. Regardless of their origin, the chickens have become the mascots of the islands. Tourists delight in seeing the normally cooped-up creatures roaming the islands with impunity and gobble up chicken-themed souvenirs. For many locals, however, the novelty has worn off and become a true nuisance as the increase in feral chickens have become accompanied by rising property damage, disease risk, and noise disturbance. Myself and neighbors have been complaining for several years now that we are not able to get any meaningful rest or sleep. The roosters jump on the fence trees near my apartment building and crow loudly daily as early as 3 a.m. I can testify that's true. Further, throughout the day, from my unit on the third floor, I can hear the chickens cackling throughout the day. Oahu resident Murdoch Ortiz said in written testimony supporting government oversight of controlling feral chicken. I'm laughing because one man's trash is another man's treasure. He complains. Personally, I love it. The chickens cackling, but by the way, at night they're quiet. Aside from the noise, residents fear the chickens and their droppings could pose disease risk in the island's already strained environmental systems. The chickens can be aggressive, too often chasing people trying to walk past them. And the chickens do indeed frequently cross the road, although the why of the joke has become less important than the danger the chickens pose to drivers who brake suddenly for clusters that wander onto roadways. Homeowners complain of scratched up gardens and damaged property, and the chickens disrupt businesses as well, leaving smelly droppings near restaurants and bothering customers. But by the way, those droppings are great fertilizer. Really good fertilizer. All of this has led to growing clamor for the state to take action against the fowl, but progress to actively reduce chicken populations has been slow. An ordinance proposed in Honolulu would place a $500 fine for feeding the birds. In early July, signs declaring "Don't feed feral chickens" went up in several Oahu parks. The Department of Customer Service of the City and County of Honolulu has also implemented a trapping program. The program has a modicum of success with only 67 chickens caught for several months. Oh, those chickens, they're not as stupid as people think. The department had been budgeted for $7,000 for the traps, and city council members questioned the effectiveness of the program when discussing the future of feral chickens control at a budget meeting in May. We really want to try to bring down costs, and that needs an additional time, the department's Kimberly Hashiro told council members. We're looking at a dual trap contract where we have multiple vendors in place and we can analyze the productivity of each. A bill for the 2022 legislative session proposed a 5-year plan to curb chicken populations with the introduction of a bird feed meant to prevent eggs from hatching went nowhere. No agency stepped up to allocate resources for the plan, to the relief of those who opposed the bill on environmental and animal cruelty grounds. Although the detractors of the bill conceded the number of chickens on the islands has become untenable, though, yes, those are my exotic birds having a meltdown somewhere in the background. Sorry, guys. Some have implied that the bill's plan to wipe out the chickens bordered on animal cruelty. Please protect the lives of innocent animals and not create a bill that generates a kill mentality because something is a nuisance. Use this opportunity to teach the community ways to provide rescue and peace and not torture, Oahu resident Heather Chapman wrote in testimony against the bill. A petition questioned the use of the ovo-control bird feed in written opposition to the bill points out to the possible contamination that could introduce to Hawaii's soil and water. Some wonder how the state would plan to keep other birds, especially endangered native species, from eating the feed. Even some of the most vehement supporters of the bill, driven to the brink by the early morning crowing, question whether the bird feed was the most humane method. Feral chickens are not the only creatures to enjoy unrestrained growth on the islands, highlighting Hawaii's ongoing fight against invasive species. The islands lack natural predators, making it easy for invasive species to find a foothold and eventually grow to eclipse endemic species, with some even become the predators themselves. Koki frogs, named for their distinctive loud and incessant croaks, are widespread on the Big Island, where they decimate native insect populations, disrupting ecological processes and human sleep schedules. Even larger mammals have been added to Hawaii's invasive species list. The axis deer, initially a gift to King Kamehameha V in the 19th century, thrive on Maui and Molokai. Like the chickens, residents complain the deer run rampant, destroying native flora and encroaching on urban communities. Not even a growing hunting industry has been able to make a significant dent in their population. This past week, Governor David Ige declared emergency relief for Maui to address access deer controls, but there have been no relief so far as to those besieged by the feral chickens. I understand this. I love chickens. If I would tell them, if you want, it's not that humane, is like trap only roosters. No roosters, no fertilized eggs. Okay? And dual purpose. See if you can find the eggs. All right? And if they're good, give them to homeless shelters. And if they have to euthanize the roosters, give them to homeless shelters or people where they need food. That's my take on it. Hi everybody. So here we are, double whammy, true crime. All right, just the way I like it. And the reason why I bring this up is, I read a lot of these cold cases and and some of the stuff, and yeah, some of the times it's almost self-evident, like yeah, maybe the DNA finally gives up. Yeah, like now we know, yeah, for sure we knew it, or the person was even in jail. And it helps sometimes identify, victims that were, like that, yeah, we kind of know, but without the DNA, maybe they weren't able to go after this perpetrator for that crime. All right, things like that. So believe me. But this story that I want to tell you about, I was, first of all, a great piece of detective work. Okay, you're going to see this is something that dates back 50, 60 years. I take that back, 60 years. And obviously, this case, as you'll see, went through the hands of several detectives, especially at the beginning. And I'm telling you, it's like, when for somebody like myself that does a lot of research or slash investigate, I was an investigator at one time in my life, not now anymore. It's like, first of all, it's a new set of eyes that looks at it. And number two, it's the person, and by this I'm not criticizing prior investigators. I have no idea who they were and what was going on. All right. And believe me, I know what it's like when they throw more than one case at you. And of course, the last one on your desk is the most important one. But anyway, getting back to that. My point is a fresh set of eyes, and when an investigator doing research says, you know what, this doesn't add up. Let me dig a little bit more because there's something here that I feel like it's like in other words, when you're doing a puzzle and you're missing one piece. It's one piece, but that one piece is the most important one of that scenario, of that situation, or of those victims, or of those relationships. Like you're thinking, okay, I know somehow this person knows this person, but I just don't know how. I have no proof that they even knew each other. And you're going to see when I do the story that this investigator, she's great. And she went the extra mile. And like I said, she knew that there was something there and she kept digging. And this is going to be a fantastic story. Okay, it's titled New Detective Solves 60-Year-Old Mystery, Declares Deceased Utahn a Serial Killer. And by the way, he really deserves that moniker. Okay, this is out of KSL.com. All right, and this just broke like maybe a couple of days ago. On a typical morning in the serene cemetery of rural Mount Pleasant in St. Pete County, a walker or jogger can be found getting in their morning steps by taking laps on the roads that border and cut through the property, which hardly see any motor traffic. Sitting unassumingly in the A plot of the cemetery is a small headstone that simply reads Monty R. Mertz, 1911-1965. Next to that is an identical headstone where Mertz's mother is buried and a sibling is nearby. Mertz's mother died 3 years after her son. For many years, Monty Mertz's grandchildren in Utah were told that he died in a car crash. But what they just recently learned is that buried in the modest plot is a suspected serial killer and child molester. I'm going to stop here right now because I was like, this is a tall tale. Okay, when you realize what he did versus what his grandchildren were told as to why he died. And I looked that up and I want to show you guys something. This is an ad. Well, not an ad. I take that back. It's an obit that published in August 18th of 1965 right here about exactly that. By the way, this gentleman died in California. But I take it the Salt Lake Tribune, they published this because he was originally from Utah, from Salt Lake City. And it's like a normal obit. It sounds, here's this man, passed away, living in San Fernando, from injuries suffered in an automobile accident on Saturday, yada yada. Talks about, his mom, his dad, married so and so, and typical obit stuff that you see, survived by so and so daughters and the grandchildren and blah 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 blah. The funeral. Okay, nothing here, nothing, no intimation of this man was initially at that point it was a murder suicide with him and his then wife at that moment. Okay, later on this, that was the obvious part. Where they got this obit from, I have no idea. Who was doing them a solid up in Utah, in Salt Lake? I don't know. Because this is, sometimes you will see obits that are kind of mysterious and they don't go into detail. And sometimes they do that to disguise like a suicide or something. So they'll have like very, like so and so person died at this place, the family. They don't even mention family members. They keep it very low key. No, this is a total misdirection of what happened with Monty Mertz. All right. And like I said, I don't know if somebody called up the Salt Lake Tribune and said, hey, print this obit for my so and so, whoever did it or who did it. But maybe that was it. And they didn't know any better. But you'll see what I mean. It's like, whoa. And that's, I guess, how his grandchildren or his family that maybe were children at that time, that's how they came to that conclusion. All right. Monty Mertz's grandchildren in Utah were told that he died in a car crash. But what they just recently learned is that buried in the modest plot is a suspected serial killer and child molester. And Mertz did not perish in any crash. Rather, he died after shooting and killing his fifth wife in California in 1965 and then shooting himself moments later, according to the Los Angeles Police Department. The murder-suicide was a final act of violence in a life filled with brutal crimes, according to the LAPD. In total, police now believe Mertz killed 2 women, a teenage girl, and a fetus in California from 1956 through 1965. And based on his behavioral patterns, Los Angeles Police Detective Rachel Evans said she believes those crimes may just be scratching the surface. In 2017, 52 years after his death, Mertz was determined to be responsible for the 1960 stabbing death of a 15-year-old girl after a key witness stepped forward to call police after living many decades in fear. Pause here a minute with story, newspaper article. Believe it or not, this person, he died. This was something they witnessed in 1960. This man died in 1965. And there's so much fear that this person, even after he was dead and buried, still feared to come forward. And this year, thanks to the work of a detective who was new to the cold case unit and has never worked on a homicide case before, a woman who spent many hours traveling to Utah trying to piece together the investigation, police determined they have enough evidence to link Mertz to the 1956 murder of a pregnant 18-year-old woman in Van Nuys, California. It had been the oldest unsolved murder in the San Fernando Valley, an area of more than 1.75 million people. Evans, who previously was a deputy with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, has been with the LAPD for 13 years and became a detective 4.5 years ago. I just felt like that's what I needed to do, she said about her decision to become a police officer. I don't know, I just felt this is where I needed to be. She is currently assigned to the Homicide Division of the Van Nuys Police Station and works on new, or what police called fresh, homicides. But in 2019, when she was first asked to join the Robbery/Homicide Division, she was assigned to the Cold Case Unit. Investigating murders, new or old, was not something Evans said she ever thought she'd be doing in her career. I have a real soft heart. I would think I can handle the crime scenes. But as I got into it, I found out I was pretty good at it, she said. Although Evans admits she was nervous going into the unit, which at the time included detectives who had been investigating homicides for 2 decades and weren't anxious to train a newcomer, she also went into her job with a never say no attitude. The rookie was greeted by the veteran detectives by being handed a large book that contained the case file for a 1956 murder. In other words, they were going to bury her. Okay, she's the rookie. They're like, yeah, okay, here, have at it. Uh-huh. One of the guys literally handed me this book and said, here, good luck with this. And it was the oldest case in the valley and hadn't been solved. I sat at my desk like, what am I supposed to do with this? Evans recalled. The case was the killing of Barbara Jean Jepson, a young pregnant woman who had been raped and stabbed to death in her home on January 31st, 1956. By the time the case landed on Evans' desk in 2019, hundreds of detectives had already combed through it over the past 60 years. Hundreds of detectives. There you go. But Evans, who admits she is highly competitive, was determined to prove herself and show the veteran officers that she could solve the case. I'm not good at letting things go. I'm competitive. I want to get it. So here I was in this huge unit. They didn't know who I was. I didn't know who they were. So they were kind of testing me to see what I could do. I like the challenge. I'm going to figure this out. But there were times I was just very frustrated with the case because I couldn't find something, and I would just keep having this feeling, keep going, keep going. I'm like, what the heck? I worked on something for 7 hours to finally get one name, but that opened up all this stuff. So luckily, I listened to that internal voice that was like, keep going, and I did, and I was able to kind of uncover all of it. It took her a week to read through the entire case file. Then she read it a second time and started taking notes. On her third reading of the file, I started seeing, hey, that's weird. Why didn't they talk to that person? Who's that person? So I started looking people up. Okay, who's alive that I can still talk to? So I started turning over rocks, not really knowing what my direction would be, she told the KSL.com. That's when Evans started to pick out interesting details about the case, like no forced entry and there was no force in the house. Like she seemed like she knew this person, and that was my first key that she knows this guy. There was nothing wrong with the door jam. She let this person in. She obviously knew him. Here's what I realized when I went to the book. There was no forced entry, no struggle. It was very clean, and the radio was blasting to try and muffle noise. They tested the radio for fingerprints. They didn't have DNA back then, and they didn't get anything. She recalled no jewelry was taken, nothing was out of place, no valuables. As Evans reviewed the case, it wasn't long before she started focusing on one man. Immediately, he was on my radar, she recalled. The Utah man was 54-year-old Monty R. Mertz. Mertz was born on May 24, 1911 in Mount Pleasant. In 1931, he married Cleo Ream, and the couple had one son and one daughter. They were later divorced, and Mertz married another woman, Bernice, in the San Fernando Valley. Although it is unclear when Mertz left Utah for California, a wedding announcement was found by Evans in the Ogden Standard Examiner. That marriage also ended in divorce in 1945 with Bernice Mertz citing cruelty, Evans said. Monty Mertz was an avid gambler, prolific child molester, violent to animals, a womanizer, and a raging alcoholic, Evans said her research uncovered. By 1948, he had moved in with Fern Spiva in the San Fernando Valley and stayed with her for 6 years, making her his common-law wife. At the time, Mertz and Spiva began living together. Spiva had a 10-year-old daughter, Barbara, from a prior relationship. I believe he groomed and molested Barbara along the way because that was the kind of modus operandi. He married these young women that had these young girls, and then he would abuse those girls, Evans said. In 1955, Barbara married Joe Jepson. Now, this is Barbara, the daughter of his last wife. That same year, Mertz married another woman, his fourth wife, who already had two children, including a young daughter. Then in 1956, Barbara Jepson was killed in her home. No one was ever arrested for the crime. So remember, she's saying this 18-year-old that was pregnant, there was no forced entry. So chances are that she let him in, number one, because he used to be her stepfather, and he probably had groomed her, so that's why she let him in. In 1960, in the nearby foothills area, 15-year-old Mary Ann Perdrada, who had a horse stable next to Mertz's and who often rode horses with him, was stabbed 9 times and killed. Then, sometimes between 1962 and 1963, Mertz married his fifth wife, Ina. She had two sons and a daughter from a prior marriage. In 1964, Monty Mertz was arrested and accused of molesting a 14-year-old girl. Information about that case was hard for Evans to collect because the case file has since been destroyed. Although Mertz is suspected of sexually abusing many girls, this was the only victim for which he was arrested. He died before his case went to trial. It was during that same year that Mertz showed up at a hospital with a gunshot wound. He claimed he was just injured in an accidental shooting, but others believed he was intentionally shot by someone else, according to Evans, but who shot Mertz and why was never determined. By 1965, Evans said all of Mertz's crimes were coming to a head. After his arrest for child sex abuse, Mertz was given a polygraph test by police who asked him about both murders of Barbara Jepson and Mary Ann Perdrada. At first he denied even knowing Jepson. When first asked about Barbara Jepson, he said, "I don't know," but later they found out he was at her funeral and he lived with her mom, Evans said. The polygraph test results concluded that Mertz had definitely guilty knowledge regarding the fate of the two murdered women. She said polygraph tests, however, are not admissible evidence in court. Still, Evans said the suspicion surrounding Mertz was growing. I think it was building, and I think he was getting caught up in stuff. He had a lot of victims, so little by little, a lot of suspicion was around him, Evans said. People started saying something is wrong with him. According to one of the original police reports, the similarities in the types of the murders and the suspect's acquaintances with both victims plus his criminal activity with young girls would indicate that he's involved in these two murders, but due to lack of evidence to substantiate these suspicions, these cases were not submitted for prosecution. Then, on August 15, 1965, while Mertz was out of jail and with numerous questions looming about what else he had been involved with, his wife, Ina Mertz, found underwear from a young girl in a drawer in their house. She confronted Mertz about whether he had also been abusing that girl. The confrontation was apparently the last straw as Mertz proceeded to grab a gun from inside his house, Evans said. Mertz chased Ina Mertz into the street, where he shot her multiple times and killed her, according to Evans, and then went back into the house and killed himself. Then, more than 50 years later, in 2017, a former stepdaughter called police to tell them that on the day a 15-year-old Perdrada was murdered, she saw Mertz come into the house with a bloody knife and blood on his hands and clothing. The stepdaughter was 10 at the time. She was afraid of him, and she waited until he was dead and the people she knew that was friends and family that she knew were dead. And then she called the Robbery Homicide Division in 2017 and told them about Mary Ann Perdrada, Evans said. Let me tell you something. That right there says a lot, because it makes you think, okay, what would she be afraid of if this man is dead? All right? And you would think maybe she needs to catch up a little bit, maybe let a couple of years go by. Apparently she was afraid of his acquaintances and his family. At least that's what she thought in her mind. She said she had nightmares every night. She's scared to death of him. She said, "I know he's dead. I know that." But she's in her 60s and she's like, "I'm still scared of this man. He haunts me." Evans said Mertz had inflicted abuse and fear on the girl by doing such things as stabbing her horse with a pitchfork. Evans noted the stepdaughter's fear and search warrant affidavit filed in Utah while seeking answers in the Jepson murder. Wow. She stated the suspect, Mertz, repeatedly abused and threatened her. According to the stepdaughter, the suspect molested many young neighborhood girls. She stated if she ever told anyone, she would be killed by the suspect. As Evans would soon learn, Mertz had a pattern of never leaving his victims alone. Even after he married after he remarried, or when his stepdaughters grew up and moved out of the house. He would never let them out of his life. He would never let them go, the detective said. One victim told Mertz one victim told police that Mertz constantly kept them in his pocket. He would still molest them, rape them until he died, Evans said. Let me tell you something, that's horrific right there. And according to Evans' research, 5 women were seen at Mertz's funeral wearing black and crying. Incredible. So he was kind of a womanizer. He had all these women that he connected with and kind of kept, she said. There's a lot of stories around him of these young girls that were abused by him. Until the day Spiva died, even though they were no longer married, Evans said Mertz would still visit her. That's why she believes on the day that Jepsen, Spiva's daughter, was murdered, Mertz showed up at her residence and did not need to break into the house. By the time she was 18, Barbara Jepsen was married and 4 months pregnant. Her husband worked for the Air National Guard, and the couple had an apartment in Van Nuys. On January 31st, 1956, Joe Jepsen went to work early in the morning. Barbara Jepsen was last seen shopping about 12:30 p.m. Police believe she was killed sometime between 1 and 4 p.m. Joe Jepsen went to work and came home at the same time every day. Evan believes that everyone, including Mertz, knew that. On that day, Jepsen found his wife's naked body on their bed with a knife still stuck in her chest. After the gruesome discovery, Jepsen first covered up his wife with a blanket and then called police, Evans said. Detectives who responded to the Jepsen house that day found several items of evidence, such as a green army jacket with blood and hair follicles in a garage. One witness told police that a person was seen leaving the area that day wearing a green jacket, according to Evans. Another talked about seeing a man with big hands and big knuckles, something the Mertz family was known for, she said. At the time, detectives believed Jepsen's death might be tied to a series of rapes in the same area. Included in the Barbara Jepsen's case file is a bulletin police issued at that time notifying officers about 3 rapes that all happened within a month or 2 of Jepsen's death. The bulletin issued on March 15, 1956, included a sketch artist drawing of the rape suspect who was believed to always wear a plaid shirt, and noticed that the suspect may be the person who murdered Barbara Jean Jepsen. By the way, for those of you watching the video version of this, this is why here, you have the mugshot, Monty Mertz's, and she's got a little blue arrow pointing to a plaid shirt. Even though he's got a jacket, that's why she was pointing out, because when I saw it, I was like, okay, so he's got a plaid shirt. She's pointing it out because that is one of the descriptors that they put out about this suspect that was apparently going around and raping women. Luckily not killing all of them, but okay. So Evans said Mertz was also known to always wear a plaid shirt. He was wearing one in his mugshot taken after his 1964 arrest. The rape victims had their hands bound during their attack, but the detective said, and Jepsen's hands were bound when she was killed. But to this day, those 3 rapes remain unsolved. Although detectives who worked the case in 1956 did an incredible job with the investigation, according to Evans, and tracked down every known rape suspect in the area to question them, DNA evidence wasn't something that was done at the time. Evans said most of the evidence from the crime scene only existed in photographs. In the case file, there's a picture of a bloody rag found in a sink at the Jepsen home. Evans said it is believed that Mertz sliced his finger while attacking Barbara Jepsen and then tried to clean it off. But the rag, likely soaked with Mertz's blood, was not collected, she said. Neither were the pillowcases nor bed sheets. Despite the lack of DNA evidence that still exists today from that crime scene, Evans attempted to use today's DNA technology to help solve the case. After some extensive research, Evans was able to track down Mertz's relatives still living in Utah in 2019, including his children. Evans gives big kudos to Draper Police and Unified Police for assisting her investigation. In September 2019, a search warrant for DNA was served on Mertz's 87-year-old son. According to the search warrant affidavit, in 2016, DNA testing was completed on multiple items from the case, but there was not enough DNA to submit the findings into the CODIS system for a match. Moreover, it is likely the suspect's DNA has never been entered into the CODIS system. CODIS, or Combined DNA Index System, is a national database of DNA profiles collected from crime scenes that can be compared to other crime scenes across the country. At the time DNA was collected from Mertz's son, Evans said detectives were considering exhuming Mertz's body but hoped that by collecting his son's DNA, the case could be solved another way. Mertz's son died just 2 weeks after that DNA was collected, she said. Although it was ultimately determined that there wasn't enough DNA from the crime scene to compare with the DNA collected in Utah, Evans said now the police have it preserved. They will revisit the case about every 5 years to see if advances in DNA technology get to the point so that the old DNA can finally be tested and compared to familial DNA from Mertz. Despite the lack of conclusive DNA, the Los Angeles Police Department determined earlier this year that Evans, after years of work, had gathered enough evidence to clear the Barbara Jepsen murder case. It is not the same standard that prosecutors would need in court to prove that a person is guilty, she said, but based on the totality of the evidence and circumstances, and after being put through the department's very strict review policy that includes several levels of administration, Evans said police can now say with 99% certainty that Mertz was responsible for Jepsen's death. Although Barbara Jepsen's husband, Joe, was cleared by police, Evans said he lived the rest of his life with a stigma surrounding him. Some members of the community questioned his innocence since he was the one who found his wife's body. There was always this worry, what if he did it, even though he was fully exonerated, Evans said. Until she died, Joe Jepsen's mother tried to solve the case in order to clear her son, even describing to True Detective magazine, despite her son telling her to just let it go. He'd be like, leave it alone, Mom, leave it alone. But she was like, no, I'm going to find out what happened, Evans said. Jepsen remarried and had 2 sons. Although the boys always believed their father was innocent, Evans said it was especially satisfying to be able to call them earlier this year and tell them that their father had conclusively been cleared. So when I called his son and told him, hey, I just wanted to let you know your dad was a good guy, he didn't do it, they were like, oh my gosh, thank you. Barbara Jepsen's cousins, who were some of the first people Evans interviewed, all believed that Mertz was responsible, even before the detective concluded her investigation, she said. On the other side, Evans said Mertz's grandchildren were upset when she told them that their grandfather is actually a killer and a child molester. His mother told everyone he and his wife died in a car accident, when in fact he killed her and then killed himself, she said. They were pretty upset. One of the granddaughters took all of his pictures down and out of the house and said, I don't want them hanging in the house. When they found out that that's who he was, she just wanted nothing to do with him. Some of the family members cried. It's shocking to hear your family is not who you thought they were. Evans said her investigation is also responsible for reconnecting another one of Mertz's daughters with her mother. That daughter was 10 when Mertz died. Soon after the murder-suicide in Van Nuys, the mother fled the state with her daughter. Evans found the daughter living in Nevada and has since put her in touch with other family members who lost track of her. To solve the Jepsen case, and you know what, that's incredible. I mean, if you want an idea that the kind of fear this guy instilled, he's dead. He killed himself, all right? And there's this woman, okay, that she leaves the state with her daughter. She leaves. She's like gone. Obviously, I don't know, where she went. She stayed in California, went to Nevada. But in other words, there was something about this man that was horrible, really. Like, in other words, that thing about, power from beyond the grave kind of deal. To solve the Jepsen case, Evans said she took a page from the detectives of the 1950s, pounding the pavement and turning over rocks looking for clues. But Evans also had her own gift for striking up conversation with people. People have a lot of info to share, so you sit back and listen to them, she said. In addition to having to prove herself to the veteran homicide detectives, Evan admits she felt solving the case was something she had to do for Barbara Jepsen's family so that they could finally have some peace about what happened. She admits that at times she felt guided as she worked to solve the 6 decades old cold case. I think people are crying from that dust for justice. Their families need it. I know it's not my family, but there's somebody who's still crying over this. This grandmother died wanting to know who killed her daughter-in-law. And you had a husband that died that people always had suspicions about. So for me, you get closure for these families to know that their dad was good or their mom was great. You have some peace for them because they've lived all these years with no peace. So for me and others that I work with, we do this so the families can have rest. I can't bring them back, but the families can have rest. I think that is such a great ending because, and I think that's why besides the mystery and the intrigue, whatever, these cold cases, I think that's what intrigues me so much about these cold cases is that obviously it's not going to bring back the victims or victims, and the perpetrator a lot of times are dead because just because of the time. Sometimes they've died in jail, sometimes like this man, he killed himself, or they've just, and some of them unfortunately die of old age because the cases are so old. But at least for whoever's there, even if the immediate family surrounding that victim, they've died themselves, that thing always hovers in a family, cousin so and so, aunt so and so, uncle, then all of a sudden it's like either the perpetrator is named, and in some cases, like they said, you have people, whether they're related to the family or the victim or not, or sometimes neighbors, that even though the police clears them, they always have like this cloud of suspicion, like people like this, her husband, Barbara Jepson's husband. He comes home and that's a horrible thing. You find your pregnant wife dead in a bed with a knife stuck in her chest, and the next thing you know, you're being looked at. Don't get me wrong. I know there's a lot of times that the perpetrator is that the husband or whoever. But obviously, if he was at work, I'm sure that he probably had a great alibi. In other words, there was no question that he was a perpetrator. But still, he lived under that cloud. And I understand very, very well this part where she says, I think people are crying from the dust for justice. Yes, I truly believe that 100%, and that's why I love these true crime. So these true crime deals going forward, and so I'll hook them up along the way with all the other weird and unusual stories that come across my desk. Unusual things. So again, guys, I will be back with you soon with more eerie news. Till then, take care.